Tonight we're going to take you on a wild ride behind the green curtain, and we'll tell you things about this world of ours that you have never heard before. But first up tonight, the idea of a single all-powerful group of people who actually control and manipulate much of the world as we know it seems so fantastic to many Americans that they literally laugh it off. Unfortunately, according to England's most controversial author, David Icke, it is anything but a laughing matter. David Icke is about to start a major speaking tour of the United States, promoting his new book entitled, "And the Truth Shall Set You Free," which has already been labeled by some international book reviews as, quoting now, the most explosive book of the 20th century, because of the scope of revelations contained in it. David Icke has exposed the intricate web of control, artifice, and financial enslavement that is being used by the unelected global elite who own or control the major world banks, the multinational companies, the drug companies, the world media, the armament companies, the world market in hard drugs, the military, and the basic institutions of what we think of as freely elected governments. David Icke is a dangerously well-informed journalist, and he joins us now from near our nation's capital in Arlington, Virginia. Hello, David. Are you there?
Hi, Jeff. Good evening.
Good evening to you, sir. Why, David, is it so hard, and you've been doing this a number of years now, why is it so hard for the average American to understand that we are, in fact, being managed and manipulated by a relatively few super powerful individuals and multinational companies? Why is that such a hard thing to grasp?
Well, I think in the end, Jeff, it's numbers. People look at, 5.5 billion people in the world, and they think, well, a few cannot control that many people. It's ridiculous. And if you're talking about controlling them physically, then that's obviously true, but it's not done physically. It's done by what I call a coup d'etat on the mind.
Yes,
it's by conditioning people to think the way you want them to think. And there are many techniques we can talk about in the way it's done daily. And also, preferably, getting people not to think at all. And if you can get people who are unique individuals in truth to concede that individuality of thought and behavior and expression to the point where we become a herd, or a bewildered herd, as the human race has largely allowed itself to become, then suddenly we're into the area of a few being able to control the world. I was in Wiltshire, not far from where I live, a couple of years ago in England, and I was on this big hillside, and there were hundreds of sheep across the hillside. And I was just enjoying the day, nice sunny day, and along came the farmer in this pickup truck, parked it, got out, stood on his stick, and virtually did nothing else. He just stood there. The moment he did that, one or two of the three of the sheep started to move in a certain direction, almost by a trigger. It's obviously happened every day. Within minutes, I was looking at Exodus with hundreds of sheep following these two or three that started the movement. And those few sheep that didn't immediately conform to that, they were given the extra dose of fear with the sheepdog. And in minutes, this combination of the bar mentality, as I call it, just not thinking, just taking what you're told to be true, and the fear mentality, which keeps a lot of people that know what's going on quiet. That combination had rounded up this herd of sheep in a few minutes. It was an extraordinary sight. And as I watched that, I realized that it's this combination of the bar mentality and the fear that actually allow the few to control the world. And they do it through the pyramid structure. I mean, what I find with people is once they see that it's possible for a few to control the world because of the structure, suddenly they begin to look at the news and see not only is it possible, but it's happening. And just very quickly, if you take the pyramid, every organization in the world today virtually is a pyramid. At the peak, you've got a tiny, tiny few people who know everything there is to know about the organization, its agenda, where it's really going, and what it's really meant to achieve. The further you come down from the peak, you're meeting more and more people who know less and less and less about what the organization's really about. They only know their tiny part in it, compartmentalization.
Exactly, sure.
And so the bank, every bank is a pyramid, and the banks are part of a banking system pyramid, which has its own peak. At the top of that banking system pyramid, all the major banks are the same organization. Same with the intelligence agencies. At the peak of their pyramid, Mossad is British intelligence, is the CIA, is German intelligence. So it is with the media and the multinational corporations that fuse into one pyramid peak of the global pyramid, which encompasses all of these individual pyramids. And up there's maybe, I don't know, it's speculated largely of around 13 families, 13 people, heads of those families that actually run the whole shebang and pervade down the pyramid the policy that's pushing us further and further towards centralization of global power.
I like what you said earlier, to condition them not to think at all. And that's really the big illusion here, is to give people the physical freedom and yet take away their active thought processes by keeping them anesthetized with media, with drugs, with toys, with diversions. To condition them...
Yeah.
Yes.
And the truth shall set you free. I'm just trying to find it now. I quote from another author right at the start, which sums up what you're saying absolutely brilliantly. It's a quote from Michael Timothy in the Anti-Intellectual Ethic. It says, "We are actively discouraged from thinking constructively and questioningly, and once an individual has accepted the numb acquiescence so encouraged, an insidiously vicious circle has successfully been promoted." And this is the key line. "Another rather convenient result of such a situation is that people who don't think constructively and questioningly don't even realize that they don't."
Amen.
I meet a lot of people who think that they're streetwise about the world, and they think because they work in universities and they work in the intellectual areas, they must know what's going on. But if they work in the universities, they're going to be the last people to know what's going on.
Isn't that the truth?
Knowledge out of the public arena is fundamental to this control.
It's amazing, isn't it? We have some organizations that are bandied about the alternative media quite a bit. A lot of Americans who endeavor to become informed, which unfortunately isn't a large enough segment yet of this society. But we've heard of the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateralists, and all of that. The mainstream media, of course, if it ever does mention those groups, dismisses them as some sort of men's social club. In point of fact, these are three of the major arms of this global elite that does administer much, at the very least, David, sets the tone of the basic tenor of our lives. Now, let's talk about these three groups, and then we're going to talk a little bit about secret societies. I want to set up the power structure
as well, because I don't want to leave Britain out of this, because Britain has been manipulating the human race well before the United States was even formed. There's one called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is the British version of the Council on Foreign Relations. They're actually the same organization. All of these groups are. They've just got different names on the shop front.
Yes, the RIIA. You know, you're right. We Americans tend to look at Britons with respect for this reserved civility, when in point of fact, and you're not the first to say it, the British have been, with a capital R, ruthless in their domination.
Have they just,
Ruthless.
Yeah.
All right, let's take these groups, if we can, David Icke, one by one, and just have a little fun with assaying who they are, what they are, and when they were set up. Let's start out with the Bilderberg group.
Well, what these groups started out from was a secret society set up in Britain in the, here we go, Britain again, latter part of the last century, early part of this century, called the Round Table, which was structured on Masonic lines. It involved a guy called Cecil Rhodes, after whom Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, was named, and
Mr. One World,
and another guy called Alfred Milner, a banker linked to the House of Rothschild. This little lot were involved in the Boer Wars in South Africa, when a guy called Lord Kitchener, who's very famous in British history.
He's a butcher, wasn't he?
Set up the first concentration camps.
Yes.
I mean, the idea that Hitler set up the first concentration camps, the British showed him how to do it in South Africa.
Exactly.
Interestingly, Cecil Rhodes, when he died, he bequeathed a lot of funds to this Round Table, from which all these organizations you mentioned were spawned. And some of his money was to set up something called Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford University, where students would be brought from around the world, highly selected people, who later, amazingly, what a coincidence, end up in positions of power in the world. And of course, the most famous Rhodes Scholar in America currently is Bill Clinton.
Yes, and it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with intellectual prowess, does it?
No, I think that's fair to say, Jeff, yeah. That's fair to say that. The Bilderberg group was the third in this list of organizations. The first one was the Royal Institute of International Affairs. What happened was that the British elite members of the Round Table, they met at the Hotel Majestic in Paris in 1919 while the Versailles Peace Conference was going on after the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And the elite British members of the Round Table just happened to be, nothing to worry about, the major players in the British war cabinet during the First World War. And they met with the American elite members of this Round Table, which just happened to be the American key members in the American administration during the First World War, the Wilson administration, particularly a guy called Edward Mandell House, who was serious manipulator in this country on behalf of this lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided they were going to set up offshoot organizations around this central core Round Table secret society that would push on this plan of creating world government, world central bank, world army, and world currency,
enforcement,
and what have you.
The enforcement, so to speak.
Yeah, manipulating us towards more and more centralization of power by creating events and then offering the solutions to them, basically. And the Royal Institute of International Affairs was the first one that was set up in 1920 in London. And just as, you walk down the high street and you see loads and loads of different names over the shops, but when you look at it, actually, it's the same, very few organizations own the lot. So these organizations I'm talking about now are actually the same force with different names.
Mm-hmm.
In 1921 came the American version of the Royal Institute, and that was the Council on Foreign Relations. The Rockefeller Empire fundamentally involved on the American side in this. And the Royal Institute of International Affairs, its main role is to manipulate British domestic, but particularly foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And the Council on Foreign Relations is there to do the same in the United States.
Okay, we're going to have to take our first break, David, coming up on that very quickly. Let me just recap what we've done so far. We've talked about the Round Table Secret Society that really came into its own power-wise after the First World War. That organization then spawned a number of other organizations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, then the Bilderberg Group, the CFR, which we've just talked about, the Council on Foreign Relations, and we'll talk about the Trilateral Commission as we continue here with Britain's most controversial author, David Icke, who is laying out for all of us tonight his view of how this world of ours is controlled and manipulated by a global elite, a very important program tonight for you. David Icke is now detailing how the world structure of power has been set up over the last 70, 80 years. We started out with the Secret Society, the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and then the executive arms, if you will, of the RIIA, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and I guess underneath those, David, would be the U.S. government, wouldn't it, at that point?
Yeah, certainly. Interestingly, the Council on Foreign Relations was set up in 1921, and since that time, every president of the United States, bar Ronald Reagan, as I understand it, but he wasn't actually president, George Bush was. George Bush was the first president to have 3 terms in office in truth, if not in official reality. And everyone but Reagan since 1921, when it was set up, has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. You can't get into the major posts, in some of the major posts in America, without being in the Council on Foreign Relations. Like Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, is a member of the CFR, and so is the stream of his predecessors. And then after that was set up, along came the Bilderberg Group, which I think is the most influential at the moment. And of course, that again involves, like all these other groups, the major people in positions of power in the world. These groups are used higher up the pyramid that I talked about earlier by the people in that peak to actually put their representatives or their stooges, frontmen, into these positions of power. For instance, the Bilderberg Group was set up in 1954. Its first chairman was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was a member of the SS before the war, according to many published works, worked for German intelligence during the war, and then became a major shareholder of Shell Oil after the war.
Hold on, David. We have to take a little pause here. So the Bilderberg Group, founded in 1954, amazing succession of power agencies put together by this original group.
Well, actually, it was a European-stroke-American operation. What I've exposed in great detail in And the Truth Shall Set You Free is how the European community, which became, of course, the European Union now, effectively a centralized superstate in Europe, was actually set up partly from America with great American influence and tremendous British influence as usual as well. And the people that set up the European community, which was there, and as it's turned out, to centralize power in Europe politically, economically, and on all the other levels. There was a guy called Joseph Ratzinger who worked with Prince Bernhard to set up the Bilderberg group, and he was a fundamental force. Indeed, this is accepted in conventional versions of history. He was a fundamental force in setting up the European community. So effectively, the same people did both the Bilderberg group and the European community, and the manipulation of European governments to form this. It is a superstate now. I mean, yes. I come from Britain. I see it all the time. European law overrides British law.
Really?
When the central bank in Europe comes into fruition and the currency, single currency, we've already signed something called the Maastricht Treaty. This is not for negotiation. We've signed this. It means that all the gold and currency reserves of the nation states of the European Union leave those countries and go to the central bank in Frankfurt.
Wow.
And there is absolutely nothing in the Maastricht Treaty to get those assets back if a country wants to pull out. And also, again, it's in the Maastricht Treaty that the central bank will be run by six unelected bankers with an 8-year guaranteed period of tenure. And it's actually in the treaty that no other area of the community, including the elected part, shall influence or override the decisions of those bankers.
Wow.
And it's kind of funny, you know. A friend from Germany was telling me that Adolf Hitler had a design, an economic design for Europe, had he won the last war. And it's a very long German name, but it translates into English as the European Economic Community. So he got what he wanted, even though he didn't win the war, because that's exactly what's happening now.
Far from
And the Bilderberg group, which is where the relevance of that group comes in terms of this European Union,
yes,
has been manipulating that situation since its formation in 1954.
David Icke, we talked just before the break about George Bush and William Jefferson Clinton, a Republican and a Democrat, but really it's the same animal. And I think the pedigree was very important, and I'd like you just to briefly sketch that out again.
Well, the whole point of the bringing Clinton in was, my understanding of it is that Bush and Clinton were talking to each other even before Bush became president. He was vice president at the time. And they were working on this old idea, because they're members of the same force. They're Illuminati frontmen. And we have to be kept into this myth that we have a choice, otherwise we realize we actually live in a dictatorship and a one-party state. Now, it's known, and this is the same in Britain too, that when a party has been in power for a certain number of terms, because nothing ever changes, because it's the same force in power whoever's in, they know that the mass psyche will eventually reach a point where it says, oh, well, they've done no good, time for a change. And so they had to organize their guy into the position of representing the opposition at the time, which was the Democrats. So he would be there when this mass psyche change happened, and they said, well, let's have a change. And if you think about it, what was the mantra message that Bill Clinton came out with again and again and again throughout the 1992 campaign? It was, time for a change. Sure. I stand for change. Change. Because that's what he was appealing to. And incidentally, this is another interesting point, given what we're talking about. In 1991, a relatively unknown governor for Arkansas at the time, Bill Clinton, was invited by David Rockefeller to the Bilderberg meeting in Baden-Baden, Germany.
You know, I remember that. I noted that at the time. I remember that. I saw one of the very rare news reports in an alternative newspaper about that, and I was very, very well aware of what that meant at the time.
Yeah, a year later, the guy's president of the United States. And it's interesting, you know, I talked about the pyramid, and it's relevant to what we're looking at now, how there is this unwritten kind of myth perpetuated between the politicians and the media that the presidents and prime ministers of the world are the peak of the pyramid of decision-making in politics. Most of the time, they're nowhere near the top. I mean, Bush is higher than most. He's higher than Clinton in the pyramid because Bush was born into this conspiracy because his father, Prescott Bush, was one of the people who, through the Harriman organization, helped to fund Hitler. It's no accident that it's Prescott Bush's son, George Bush, who went on to be head of the CIA and head of the Republican Party at the time of Watergate, and eventually Vice President, President of the United States. But if you look at the major positions of power in the world, whether it's President of the United States or whatever, it's amazing the common themes between them. For instance, the last 5 Secretary Generals of NATO, and I only know it's the last 5 because that's as far as I've had time to research back so far, but it's many more than that.
Right.
Joseph Luns, Lord Carrington, Manfred Werner, Willy Claes, and the present one, Javier Solana. They're all Bilderbergers. It's a Bilderberg appointment, the Secretary General of NATO. Same with the head of the World Bank, James Wolfensohn, the current one, who was put into that position by Bill Clinton. He's a Bilderberger, Trilateral Commission member. One of his predecessors, Robert McNamara, with the inspired middle name of Strange, an American, head of the World Bank. He was a Bilderberger, and these appointments are decided. It's like the major appointments in America, in the American administration. If you look at the Carter administration, he was the first Trilateral Commission president of the United States. His administration was awash with members of the same organization and the Council on Foreign Relations. Walter Mondale, his vice president, Trilateral Commission. Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State, Trilateral Commission. A guy called Brzezinski, who was his national security advisor, he was the one who, with David Rockefeller, set up the Trilateral Commission.
Yes, and you've got Harold Brown, General David Jones, Stansfield Turner, on and on.
All of them, yeah. And when the Bush-Reagan administration came in and replaced the Democratic one of Carter, their administrations were awash with members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the same when the Clinton administration came in. I mean, it's just a one-party state, and it's a one-party world increasingly. That's the point we need to get, because you look at Harold Wilson and Ted Heath, 2 people who opposed each other in Britain and swapped the premiership of Britain between about 63, 64 and 1975. They were both Bilderbergers. And Margaret Thatcher was a Bilderberger, and so it goes on. The present leader of the Labour Party, who looks certain to become the next Prime Minister of Britain, he's a Bilderberger. And interestingly, taking the Clinton story to Britain, in 1993, this virtually unknown Labour Party Home Affairs spokesman, Tony Blair, was invited to the Bilderberg meeting in Greece, and a year later, after the very, very sudden death of the Labour leader John Smith, in came Tony Blair, who within 24 hours of John Smith's sudden death was elected leader of the Labour Party by the whole of the British media.
Wow.
So it's if you want to get on in politics, Jeff, then get David Rockefeller to invite you to the Bilderberg meeting, and it's off you go. Really.
Well, my father said something once, and I think we talked earlier about this. He said anyone who seeks public office should be barred from it. That is actually a very, very profound statement, because there's another statement I hear which says anyone who gets to the top in politics is the wrong person to be there. It's because the structure of politics and what it demands of people and their attitudes that it demands of them to get to the top of the greasy pole. What an amazing game is afoot. Just amazing. And so many people just don't have a clue. I don't pretend to know it all, but I've peeked again behind the curtain, which you are endeavoring to help all of us do tonight, to let us know there is much more going on than we'll ever read in the mass media or hear or see on television, which, by the way, as you of course know, may be the most insidious powerful weapon ever unleashed on humankind. The average American child now, David Icke, watches television up from 38 hours a week to 43 hours a week.
Yeah, and if you look at who owns the major networks in America, it's the same people. It is the same people. It's the same people who own the networks, who own the banks, who own the politicians, who own the security agencies, who own the multinational corporations. It is the same people, and the truth shall set you free in great details that shows how all these lines of power come back to the same people in the same operation. And the money system, this ludicrous thing we stand for of borrowing money that doesn't exist and paying interest on it, is the key foundation way that they control the mass.
Let's go ahead, and I was going to hold that, but let's start that right now. You just said it all. Borrowing money that doesn't exist and paying interest on it. That gets back to fractional banking, I guess, to a degree. The idea of printing money of which there is no backing, loaning it, and collecting interest on it is the greatest scam I have ever in my life seen. It's
astonishing, and most of the money isn't actually printed. It goes back, because this is, again, as we keep talking about, this is a long-term thing. Mm-hmm. Prince Bernhard, who was the first head of the Bilderberg group and a major manipulator, he was actually a German prince who married into the Dutch royal family. Mm-hmm. A predecessor of his, another German member of German royalty who married into the Dutch royal family, was a guy called Orange. He became king of England eventually. Mm-hmm. He was the one, when he was on the throne of England, who set up the Bank of England, which came out of out of that spawned the whole of this central banking network, which again is a massive pyramid. And at the top of the central banking system of the world are about 13 people who operate out of Switzerland. It's no surprise or coincidence that whenever there's a war in Europe, the one country never involved is Switzerland, because that's the financial base of the people that are causing the wars.
Amazing.
And so this is kind of from William of Orange and his time creating the Bank of England and all that has come off from it, has spawned this whole idea of lending money that doesn't exist and charging interest on it. And it works like this, what the banks say is all they're doing is borrowing money from investors effectively, from depositors, and lending it to people that want loans. That is actually a complete lie. They are not doing that. If you take a simple example, take a bank and say it's got one investor, for simple terms. It's got one investor. Someone has deposited with that bank $1 million. Mm-hmm. Along comes another guy who wants to borrow a loan of $100,000. And to do that, he has to put up as collateral wealth that does exist, like his house or his business or whatever. Sure. So the bank says, okay, we'll lend you the £100,000. And all they do, they don't print the money. They just type into that man's account $100,000. Now, if all they're doing is lending investors money, then the guy who deposited $1 million has now got in his account $900,000. But of course he hasn't. His statement still says he's got $1 million in that bank. But now this guy's statement says he's got $100,000 in his account. Now, where has the $100,000 come from? It's come from nowhere. It's just someone typing figures onto a screen, not even printing the money. And from that point on, he is paying interest on $100,000, and all the bank has done is type figures onto a screen. The overwhelmingly vast majority of so-called money, most of which doesn't even exist even as physical money, not even unbacked physical money, it's just figures on a screen. Mm-hmm. It comes into existence as a debt to start with. The stuff we use to theoretically purchase with is actually a debt to start with, because only about 10% of money actually comes out of the government itself. Most of the so-called money in circulation is brought into circulation by the private banks loaning figures on a screen and charging interest on them. I saw an amazing figure from Australia for 1991, which is very significant for the world because it's the same around the world. In 1991, of 203 billion Australian dollars theoretically in circulation, only 12 billion existed as coins and bits of paper. All the other stuff was figures on a screen.
Wow.
And this is fundamental to our freedom and our way of life, because it's like getting wet paint on your fingers.
Only one minute, David. 1 minute, David.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, every single product that we pick off the shelf, every one, the price of that is considerably inflated in compared with what it needs to be.
Oh, sure.
Because everyone in the production process, the transportation process, and the shop that sells it and everything, they're all adding a little bit extra to their price.
All right, we got to take our break now coming up.
Okay, because they need to pay interest on money that doesn't exist.
I just don't understand how the average person can so readily take on such vast debt. But when you think about the from cradle to grave indoctrination we are given, from credit cards right on down the line to the old installment payment plan, I guess it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and I did a workshop in England. What staggered me is how many people in the banking system and in politics have no idea how the banking system works.
Is that right?
I was talking to this guy. He came to a workshop I did about 6 months ago, and he just retired from the banking world. He'd been in it all his life, and in the last year they'd eased him out by giving him a research project to do. And he looked at me in almost disbelief, and he said, "It doesn't exist, does it? It's just figures on a screen." And I thought, and you've been in the banking system all your life, and you've just realized that. And so why should the public realize how it works when even some people in the banking system haven't got a clue?
Amazing. I guess a word of advice to the average consumer, if you want to be free, at least entertain a semblance of freedom, keep the debt load minimized and get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, maybe we could look a little later at how the American debt came into existence, the biggest debt in the world. See, one of the great ways, the great way that we are manipulated in the world on a mass scale is something I call problem-reaction solution. You create the problem covertly. It may be a government collapse, it might be a run on a currency, it might be a terrorist bomb. We've had a few of them recently, none of which have had responsibility claimed for, interestingly.
Yes.
And then you offer your solution. Say for a terrorist bomb, if you want more power to the security forces, people are not just going to accept more power if you just suggest it. So you have to manipulate them to demand it. Centralizing control and justifying power is a global threat to the environment. Now, 2 years after 1966 came the Club of Rome, which was set up on the Rockefellers' estate in Italy, and involved people linked into this Bilderberg Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations Network. It's another arm of that. And underneath a global threat to the global environment was a threat from an extraterrestrial force. That was in the 1960s.
Sure.
It said that is one way of justifying centralization of power and controlling the population. And it's kind of interesting that I was involved in Britain in the environmental movement right through the 80s. And it's interesting how all the major global reports saying there's a global environmental problem, something must be done, are actually put together and paid for and funded and orchestrated by the people who are actually dismantling this planet's ecology. There's a guy in America, a Canadian, called Maurice Strong, who's very much linked into this whole network I've been talking about tonight, very close to the Rockefellers and David Rockefeller. He was the first head of the UN Environment Agency, and he was the head of the 1992 Earth Summit in Brazil, of which there was global publicity. There's a problem with the environment, something must be done.
Oh, that's right.
So when the people suggesting the solutions are also creating the problems, my ears prick up very rapidly.
You're real fast. This, of course, this whole ET threat thing goes back to General Douglas MacArthur, who made the famous speech at West Point. The great anchorman Ronald Reagan made 4 different references to an off-planet threat. And with movies like Independence Day and others, and now coming up up in December a very big film called Mars Attacks. Again, a hostile, not a Steven Spielberg, benign, benevolent E.T., but a hostile E.T. film. One wonders. And I really do believe that the vast majority of people have been lulled into such a sense of they're anesthetized, if I have used that word before. I think it's more appropriate now than ever. And they would be easy prey for a setup like that.
Aldous Huxley, the author of A Brave New World, he said in an interview back in 1958 that the social engineers of the future, they will figure out a way to enslave us by tricking us and conditioning all of us into thinking that we are actually free. This was also well thought out and researched by the father of propaganda, Edward Bernays, who in his 1928 book, Propaganda, Bernays wrote, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible
to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it."
He called it the engineering of consent and proposed that
those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country.
So are we living in an Orwellian nightmare that was prophesied by the likes of George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, and Edward Bernays? Well, I did some research and I put together some video clips that shows how the globalist mind control has been present in our everyday lives, our entire lives, because the future is now.
If you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the ruled. And this they will do, partly by drugs, as I foresaw in Brave New World, partly by these new techniques of propaganda. They will do it by bypassing the sort of rational side of man and appealing to his subconscious and his deeper emotions, and his physiology even, and so making him actually love his slavery. I mean, I think this is the danger, that actually people may be in some ways happy under the new regime, but they will be happy in situations where they oughtn't to be happy.
This is The Big Picture, an official television report to the nation from the United States Army.
Yes, in modern warfare, our military leaders are finding that words and ideas are highly effective weapons. Here, recruits with specialized backgrounds were taught the nature, methods, and techniques of propaganda and its dissemination. Radio presents these facts in any number of ways. Perhaps its most rewarding form of expression is news. For news is ready-made propaganda, and to an enemy denied access to outside information, it's as welcome as food and water. Radio's principal advantage is that it can reach remote areas and reach them quickly. So that one program can be repeated and thereby reach a larger audience, it is often recorded on discs or on tape. The same show can be rebroadcast at convenient times in different areas.
Unfortunately, you've grown up hearing voices that incessantly warn of government as nothing more than some separate, sinister entity that's at the root of all our problems. They'll warn that tyranny is always lurking just around the corner. You should reject these voices.
Public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
My team and my specialties, information operations and the psychological arm of things, we are trained to deceive if we have to.
If you found out that your public affairs team that was showing you around actually had completed a 40-hour course in psychological operations and was trained in psyops and in military deception, you start to question, hey, is that an appropriate use of that resource?
You shouldn't trust me. In fact, by my actually participating in that, I will taint the news.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Go read a book by the father of modern advertising, Edward Bernays, where he calls you a dumb slave and admits they run your whole life. I've read both his major books. One of them's called Propaganda. Edward Bernays.
Psychological warfare operations went into high gear. Our propaganda was beginning to pay off.
There's a global crime syndicate that controls NATO and the major Western governments, and it is using Al-Qaeda to overthrow secular governments.
I also can't see sending my son to fight with Islamic rebels against Christians. I also can't see my son going to fight on the same side as Al-Qaeda.
The people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
Well, pancaking almost like a precision implosion.
Everybody get away from the tower. You gotta know the tower that just came down 1013. Where exactly are you, King?
Millions of people are sick and tired of the endless wars, the poverty that is coming, the attacks of our civil liberties.
I don't believe in conspiracy theories. Conspiracies, yes. If I believe it, there's nothing theory about it.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Meantime, there are questions multiplying today about the mysterious death of award-winning journalist Michael Hastings.
We are also requesting that your team of advisors include a senior officer who is thoroughly experienced in psychological operations.
Psychological warfare was established as a special staff agency. This move had far-reaching results.
You consider yourself a Marxist?
Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct.
This American citizen, Obama, depends on your next decision.
What if the whole purpose of government was to negate freedom? What if freedom was a myth? What if the Constitution meant nothing to the government? What if everything the government has or owns or controls has been stolen?
It's what we're doing here, and let's not kid about it. We're building a domestic army, and we're shrinking the military because the government is afraid of its own citizens.
This is what we have to look forward to all over the place. Look how quick, within a matter of days, they were able to go into a martial law status here in Ferguson. They had this entire bridge, this road blocked off.
You on the parking lot. This is the St. Louis County Police Department. Disperse now.
They're coming to flank. Joe Biggs got shot with a rubber bullet. Now I'm running down the street. Man, quit shooting at me! Quit shooting at me!
Consciousness. All that is, has been, and ever will be. There is nothing to fear. Whatever happens, we are always that. Mind fears, because it's programmed to fear. When we're conscious, there's no fear in this. It's a shake of the head. Pathetic. 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 And we need to do this. Compliance. We need to challenge that. Not with violence, not even with aggression. We just need not to fight it. We need to walk away, because without our acquiescence, it cannot survive. You know, when you look at a pyramid, we've been manipulated to believe the power in a pyramid is at the top. It ain't. The top of the pyramid is there because the rest of the pyramid's holding it up. We're holding this whole thing together. There's a story I told many years ago of a British comedian called Larry Grayson, who died. I kind of knew him vaguely, and not closely, but vaguely. And I went to his memorial service in Covent Garden, and this other comedian did this tribute to his life in which he read out this story that Larry Grayson had told him. When they were going around the variety halls and the theaters in the 60s, they had this all-male show. And Larry Grayson was the only woman in it because he's dressed up as a woman. And he said that the end of the show, the last scene, all the sailors, all the men came on dressed as sailors, and they were singing Rule Britannia. You know, Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. Oh, I'm very pleased for you. Okay? And as it built up, Larry Grayson would come on dressed as Britannia with the helmet and the shield, and he would be manhandled up the side of this pyramid to the top for the big finish. And he said one night, he said things seemed to be going rather well. He said, and then I noticed that a sailor in the bottom left-hand corner had got rather a cough. And this cough got worse and worse and worse to the point where the sailor couldn't stay in the pyramid anymore and stepped out of it. Larry Grayson, symbolic of this elite at the peak of the pyramid, ended up in the second row. And the elite, the power center, had done nothing to bring about this. One sailor, the bottom of the pyramid, had got a cough. And the whole thing collapsed. And I listened to that and I thought, my God, yes, that's it. We, the powerless people, are holding the powerful people up there, and they know that. They're terrified of us realizing that. Do you remember that movie, animated movie, A Bug's Life? A Bug's Life with the grasshoppers? And what happened was there was these ants, an ant island as they called it, and these grasshoppers used to come every year and take all the food, and the ants had to spend a whole year gathering the food together for the grasshoppers because they were terrified of the grasshoppers. And there weren't many of these grasshoppers, and one day they're in their winter quarters in a tree, these grasshoppers, and they've got all the food they need, and someone suggested among the rank and file grasshoppers that they didn't need to go to Ant Island this year because they had all the food they needed. And then out came the leader of the grasshoppers to tell them the facts of life, and the few are going to control the many. It's a wonderful speech. If you ever can see that movie, A Bug's Life, I do recommend it. And he said, basically, they outnumber us 100 to 1. And if ever they figure that out, there goes our way of life. So we have to keep the pressure on, basically. We have to keep them working, so they don't figure out where the real power is. And that's why this network of manipulation works so hard to keep us in these states. Like I said earlier, what are people leaving foreclosed homes for? Foreclosed by banks that have caused the unemployment that lead to them having to leave their homes. Stay there, refuse to leave, make it difficult for them. Expose them for what they are. We make it so easy, the non-compliance. No longer will we just do it because we're told to do it. Is it just? Is it right? Okay, I'll do it. Is it unjust? Is it not right? I ain't doing it. We start to make the decisions on what we will and will not do based on our values and not some imposition from the dark suits. These people are gonna grant me or grant me not my freedom. I'm all that is. You can't grant me freedom. No one can grant me freedom. I am freedom. It's what I am. The big question, what would consciousness do? What would consciousness do in this situation? And when we ask that question, it really just changed the way we see the world. Not what would I do, mind, or frightened. What would consciousness do? You know, this is a great line. If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. And what will transform this world overnight is if we started doing what we knew to be right in the situations we face, instead of what we think is right for us in the moment. Not what are the consequences for me, or what's the best thing for me, how do I get the best deal out of this? What is right? What is just in this situation? If we started making decisions based on that, the world would transform overnight. These are very simple things. If we want a world of peace, then we need to be peaceful. We don't need to fight for it. We just need to be peaceful, and we'll bring that about. If we want a world of kindness, we need to be kind, and then it will naturally unfold. We don't fight for kindness. As Martin Luther King said, it's a wonderful saying, piece of oratory. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But consciousness asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. And when enough of us do that, what is right will manifest by definition. And we're in this position now where this vibrational change, this energetic change is taking place, where we can start cracking these eggshells, where we can start becoming the full magnitude of who we are, where we can be consciousness in the now, using mind to experience this reality instead of being governed by it, turning the key to let consciousness in. We're being offered this opportunity now. No longer can we say we didn't realize who we are, we didn't know we could do that. I was kind of waking up one day, and I saw this earth imprisoned, and I saw this big lock and a key going in and being turned. I went on the internet just very shortly afterwards. I was looking for a picture, not this one, and that's what I saw. The picture I'd just seen in my half kind of sleep. And that's what we're being offered the chance to do now, to turn the master key called becoming conscious that will bring an end to this. It's being given to us, we just need to take it. And to take it, we need to say enough. Enough of being enslaved by these people, enough of being enslaved by our manipulated ignorance, enough of being enslaved by the fear of being who we are. Enough! It is time to fly. It is time to fly. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.